everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you are new here, and welcome back to another 25 creepy things that kids say. I am so excited. We are almost, well, we are over halfway done this series of things, and I'm sure there are plenty more to come, but these are the ones that I have found that I'm reading to you guys. So I'm very excited. And let's just get right into it because I don't see a point in wasting any time whatsoever. And you can also find the rest of them in the playlist that I have created down below. When driving from my sister's house with my niece, who was about 3 at the time, she'd always tell us that she lived down a road we always passed when she was a sea captain. Used to give us goosebumps, and we'd call her Creepy Baby. And now she's in her late 20s and still says she sees relatives that have passed. When I was 6, my mom took me to visit my great-grandfather's grave while we were on holiday in Ireland. She let me place the flowers by the headstone, after which I turned to her and said, "I'll dance on your grave when you die, Mommy." I thought that was a nice turn of phrase people used. I must have heard it on the television. Driving straight from Florida to Toronto, my 3-year-old gets up from her sleep at 12:30 a.m. "Mommy, can you feel the trees burning?" I'm freaked the hell out, and just like that, she goes back to sleep. When my son, firstborn, was little, I'd rock him. He'd look over my shoulder and give the most amazing smile, and I'd just cross myself. I swear babies see what we can't. My son says many strange things. One day, a few weeks ago, we were watching cartoons. He just looks at me and says, "Do you miss your old home, Mom?" I asked him what home he was talking about. "Here," he said, "the one in the woods, before me and Sissy and Daddy." He wouldn't say anything else about it or answer any more questions, and I have never lived in a house in the woods. This story has been retold to me by my mom. When I was 3 years old, I woke up one day, walked up to my mom, grabbed her hand, and led her to our family photos. I pointed a picture of her grandmother and said, "That lady came to me last night. She talked to me. Her name is Angela." My mom had never told me her name before, only referred to her as her grandmother. When my son was 2 years old, he would tell me gleefully, "I'm going to eat you all gone." My youngest was 2. We moved to the country town my dad was born and raised in. After about 6 months, I had just finished putting up family pictures, which I hadn't done previously, while my 3 kids were sleeping. In the morning, just after breakfast, my youngest went to the pics and stopped in front of the one with my dad. She turned to me and said, "Pa's nice, isn't he, Mom?" My dad had died 5 years before she was born. Often, late at night, I would hear her talking to him after that. My mom told me that when I was little, I used to tell her about this tall black man with no face I used to see in the wardrobe. When we moved, I found out that he had followed us there. When I grew up, my mom told me she used to see it too, as well as my sister, but not my dad. Once my sister and I were home, one in the bathroom and one in the living room, and we said we'd both seen the man again around the same time and that it had changed. We described it identically. When my nephew was about 5 years old, I remember taking him around the neighborhood for trick-or-treating. We stopped at a few houses with a few lit pumpkins and fake cobwebs, but my nephew said that we wouldn't be getting any treats from this house. I asked him why, and he said that the cat told him. I noticed a gray cat sitting in front of the garden of the house. We did indeed get no answer from the doorbell, and a few days later, police were outside the house. The owner had died in his sleep. My son was about 4 years old and asked me in the middle of the night if I had said that he was a good boy. I told him no, and that I had been sleeping. He insisted that somebody must have said it. We live alone. The next morning, I saw a face melted into the ice of my kitchen window, which was about 1.5 stories off the ground. At the time, he slept in the living room, so he was about 10 feet away from that window. Whatever it was had to have been floating at least 12 feet tall. When our son was 2, he suddenly began having an imaginary friend who he called Nate. We dismissed it as normal until one day as I carried him around the house, pointing at family photos while asking, "Who is this?" As he correctly answered, "That's mommy, that's daddy," etc., until I pointed to a photo of his twin brother who had died of SIDS at 3 months. And when I was pointing at that picture, I asked who this is, and he replied very joyfully, "That's Nate." My son was different from day one. He used to tell both me and my mom stories about when he used to be here. He was a doctor, and his name was Craig. One day when I was cooking chicken, I set the innards aside to discard as I normally do. He stood at the counter and asked if he could have the heart. I don't know why, but I gave it to him. He came back a short time later and said, "See, Mom, this is the aorta, and these are the left and right ventricles." Mind blown. He was 8. When I was 3, I had a plastic toy telephone that I loved to pretend to talk to people on. One day, my parents were sitting on the couch watching TV while I was playing with my phone again. My parents said I picked it up and said, "Yes, okay," then hung up. I turned to my dad and said, "That was Uncle Jay. He said he's okay now," and then went back to playing. My dad's brother, Jason, had died in a car accident a year before I was born. One day, my 2.5-year-old was pretending monsters were coming to get us. He would say, "Monsters are coming, hide," and pull a blanket over our heads. And one of these times he yelled, "Fire is coming," instead, so I said we should hide. "We can't hide from fire, Mommy," so I asked him what we do with fire. With a straight face and a matter-of-fact tone, he replied, "We burn." Some years ago, I had given birth to a stillborn son. A few months later, I was out to dinner with a friend and her 2-year-old daughter. My friend's daughter saw a picture of my son on my phone and pointed to it, exclaiming, "Baby!" Soon she was waving to someone across the table. There were no other tables in that direction, so I asked her who she was waving at. She pointed again, and this time to the empty chair across from her, and exclaimed again, "Baby!" My brother would always mention his other family, and as he got older and started to speak more, about 1 to 4, he would give a lot of detail. A doctor from the States was interested and came to study him. He took us to the house that he lived in 113 miles away, told us all their names and where they died and how they died, including himself in his previous life, and even showed us where he was buried under the sand, and as they dug him up, they saw the cold case from 64 years ago. He doesn't remember it at all. That's insane. My ex-husband was working in Saudi. This particular morning, my son got up and started to say, "My daddy is coming today, and we will go and do..." All that morning, he kept talking about the different things he was going to do with his dad. Just after lunch, there was a knock on the door, and my son, who certainly couldn't have seen anybody pull up, shouts, "That's my dad!" I had the biggest shock when I opened the door, and he was standing there. I will never forget the time when my mother and I were on our way home. It was around 9 or 10. I was around 9 or 10 at the time. I had a passenger side window open, and there was a piece of paper on the dash. Just as we were coming up to the junction, I had a vision of the piece of paper flying out the window, my mother looking at it driving through the junction and getting hit by a truck. So I closed the window, held the paper in my hand when we passed the junction, and the truck I had seen passed us. I still have that piece of paper. When my youngest daughter was 3, she asked me if I remembered when she was in my tummy. I told her, of course, but she stopped and looked at me very serious and said, "Not the time I was born, Mom, the first time, before Jaden and Paula. I had a miscarriage before her older siblings, and I have never told her about them." My nephew was 3 at the time and was talking to my sister the morning after a family wedding. My sister asked him who the most beautiful woman was at the reception, and of course he answered, "The bride." When she asked him who the most handsome man was there, he said, "Uncle Rod." My sister said, "No, dear, Uncle Rod was killed in a car accident last year. He wasn't there." My nephew looked at my sister and said, "Didn't you see him holding the door open for people?" My brother passed away when my nephew was 2, and my grandfather the year before that. As my nephew was growing up, he used to play alone in his dad's old room in my parents' house. He used to say he was playing with Daddy and Opa. They used to make paper planes, which my grandfather used to do. One day he came to say that my grandfather says, "Hello, old lady," which my grandfather used to say to my grandmother all the time. 3 years ago, when I first moved into my house, I found a photo of my grandparents on their wedding day. I thought it would be nice to hang it up. My son, who was 4 at the time, was watching me hang it on the wall and suddenly burst into tears. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "I miss Nana." I asked him which one, and he pointed on the photo on the wall. My Nana had died when my mother was 2 years old. Man hobbles into a grocery store using a cane. 5-year-old. "Hey mom, that man is using a walking stick because his bones aren't strong and he'll die soon, right?" That is it for another 25 creepy things the kids say. Please, if you haven't already, give this video a big thumbs up. Leave a comment down below in the description box if you have anything else to add. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell because I am uploading as much as I possibly can over the next little while I am on the road and moving. I love you guys all so very much, and I will see you in the next video.